that are costing, right? 47.
I don't know. Yeah.
4 million 7.
So I'm asking the fuel should be going down.
How you doing?
I think that number.
Pretty good. Yeah.
No, I think we should call the meeting to order. We do that, and then you build up a surplus in this.
Good afternoon, everyone.
I'd like to call the meeting of the Finance Committee for Monday, January 11th to order. Thank you, Linnell, for sending all the packets out. Take a look at our agenda. Is there any public comment to come before the committee today on any topics other than what is on the agenda? We have the minutes from the January 7th. Do we have them? I don't see those.
No, we have minutes. No.
Okay. I don't think we have defer those. The two agenda items for today will be to continue to review the revolving funds, and then to continue our review and action on the citizen warrant articles. Brian is going to walk us through the revolving fund process and review. A couple things to note. Let's see, what were the couple of things to note? So for the second time, we've seen you will note that there's a 5-year projection, which is something the committee has asked for in the past. And I've also asked Brian to start with, since this is not something we talk about very often, it's kind of a once-a-year thing, he's going to begin by giving us a brief summary of revolving funds and how they work. So, Brian?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly, what you have before you is revolving funds and other special revenue funds that typically, and I'll go through kind of what they are. So the revolving funds that we have to appropriate annually are authorized under Chapter 44, Section 53E and a half. Any fund that falls under that, which in the packet is labeled where it comes from or what authorization it is under. So in the packet, if it says 44, 53E and a half, it's a revolving fund which requires annual authorization. Once it's authorized at town meeting, it can be spent without further appropriation up to the limit that is authorized at town meeting. It cannot exceed that limit. So once it hits that limit, there's no more spending in the fiscal year for which it's authorized. If it is not reauthorized, all of the money, any fund balance that may exist in the fund is automatically at the end of the year should be automatically revert to undesignated fund balance in the general fund. All the money goes into the general fund. It does not get to stay there. There's actually one that I noticed today that should have been done for because it was not reauthorized at last year's town meeting. So typically these are very, very specific departmental receipts. They're called out under the statute. There's a guideline that DOR issues on what they are and what they can be used for. There's also, when we go to town meeting, there's authorization on who can expend from the fund and what the limit is. There is a threshold that says that the total in aggregate of all revolving funds cannot exceed 10% of the prior year real estate and personal property and real property tax levy. And then each individual fund cannot exceed 1% of that. We get very close to 10% because of the fuel revolver, which has special legislation to allow that to be a revolving fund. The state actually would allow us, in the case of asking for special legislation or having special legislation to exempt the cap from, we could go past the 10%, but we have to continue to have that. Obviously, the legislation would allow us to do that from the revolving fund because the fuel revolver is about $5.3 million. So, we have been very close to the 10% cap before in a couple of prior years. So that's how we would be able to do that. So there is a limit, as I said. It's set every year at town meeting. It cannot exceed that in terms of expenditures. Once that's reached, expenditures for whatever year it's authorized in are done. If we don't reauthorize them, then any remaining fund balance would automatically revert to the general fund. Within this packet, there are some others that are considered revolving funds but are specifically authorized by specific statutes and law. And once those are accepted, there's no further need for, you don't need to annually accept them. You only need to authorize the spending limit annually. So, i.e., such one perfect example of that would be the ambulance reserve fund. There's a specific statute in the law that allows the creation of that, does not require further authorization after that. It does require authorization of this when we authorize spending from it. Yep.
So is that one subject to the 1%, 10%
No,
limit?
that
So
is not.
That one's out.
That is separate. Only revolving funds under 53E and a half are.
So that makes the airport fuel revolver a little bit of an odd one. And
It is an odd one because that's
specifically-
special legislation that created a revolving fund for that, yes.
Even though it still counts under those.
Yes.
those-
Yeah.
So do you want to go quickly by, just from the committee, how would you, does anyone have specific questions? You want to review, go one by one?
It'd probably be easy. Everybody's had a couple days. If there's questions, that might be the easiest way to do it.
Yeah.
And there are some people here that can help answer the questions
Okay,
if I'm stumped. Hopefully not.
Cliff?
I've always tried to follow this embarkation fee because as the economy's turned around and there's just more and more and more people,
Right.
I would just think it would go in that trend, but it doesn't seem to go.
One would think that it would go in this trend because that is because of the way that is done. Excuse me. This came up one year when I think we had $105,000 in receipts, and it looked kind of out of whack to me. We get reimbursed when the state actually receives the money from the ferry companies. So they don't. It's not as rooms and meals or anything like that. It's special legislation so that we only get reimbursed once they report the numbers, and then the state has been paid, and then they're basically a pass-through. So if it's not being, I'm not saying it's not, but if it wasn't paid timely, we wouldn't get it until the states actually receive the money. So, because we did ask about that, and one year it looked very different. I think it was $105,000, and then it went to $272, and it was some of the timing of the payments. So, once the state gets the information from the ferry companies and the payments, then they remit to us.
So, Brian, do we have to cash flow the expenses, the salaries, and labor under the embarkation revolving fund? Or is the timing on the receipt of the cash such that?
Well, we have a fund balance we authorize a number up to, I think last year was $190,000. Even with that timing, we still have fund balance, which would be cash in the bank that will cover that timing difference.
John?
A couple of questions.
Sure.
We're talking about starting the year with about $5,219,000 and if you add all of those revolvers together.
Okay.
I assume that money is invested somehow?
It is.
In what way?
Well, depending on cash flow needs, it could be invested in short-term CDs. It could be sitting in the pooled cash. I'd have to ask exactly how it's done. I mean, because a lot of that is typically needed within a very short period of time, it probably is not all invested long-term, and I can get you the answer on exactly where all of it is.
Yeah. Do you have a strategy of any type of either running those down or keeping them about the way they are, or when you look at each individual?
Well, the hope is to keep them somewhere where they are. I don't want to run them down, because if we run them down, then we have to find alternate funding sources to do some of the things that we're doing through those. So the hope is that they would, at minimum, cover the expenses in an annual year, or possibly be revenue increase or fund balance increases to cover future costs.
I do notice that in 2017, you're talking about ending the year at a lower balance of about $751,000 less than what you started
Right,
with.
and a large driver of that is relative to, which they're potentially, this has been presented as we know it now. I think the town manager at a previous meeting had talked, and I think it was also in our budget presentation, about BLS versus ALS. And there is some potential or possible changes that are going to be occurring in the ambulance reserve fund, but the reduction that you're talking about in fiscal 17 is primarily driven by about a $600,000 reduction in the ambulance reserve for the purchase of 2 ambulances. That's where the majority of that $751,000 that you're referring to is coming from. We're reviewing and analyzing some possible changes to that in terms of revenue and expenditures, which is going to require, obviously, a presentation of the Board of Selectmen and some other action, so I have not accounted for any of that change in there because it actually hasn't happened as of yet.
On the investment side, isn't there some limitation that you can only invest in cash or near cash?
Stabilization funds can be they can be invested in CDs, they can be invested in government securities. They can be, the thing is that that's all controlled by the treasurer. I actually, ironically enough, have no ability to dictate where it goes. I can only see where it goes and advise. I can't actually make any changes to it. But
I was thinking about the revolving funds. So those aren't in any kind of long-term instruments, are they?
The majority of that money would not be invested long-term because of the cash flow needs. They'll use the ferry embarkation fee or one of the, or the beach improvements. Since we are expending or planning to expend out of it, then it would be, if it was invested, it would be more short-term so that we have the ability to meet the cash flow needs. A lot of that would not be. The only thing I would ever consider investing long-term would be any rather large portions of fund balance that we know we're not going to need for a period of time. Other than that, it would all be very short-term investments so that we would have the access to it as needed.
Go ahead.
Quick question on the fuel revolver, Brian, the airport fuel revolver.
Sure.
You're budgeting for fiscal 17, $5.3 million in revenue and $5.3 million in fuel expense.
Yes.
I think is the way, if I read that right. Clearly, oil costs or fuel costs are going way down. So is that a reasonable assumption, and is that just sort of being left to be conservative? It seems to me you're going to be generating surplus if things stay the way they are today.
That's being conservative and where the airport felt comfortable budgeting it at. I did have lengthy conversations with the airport manager about that as we went, and he asked to keep it at both 5.3 for revenue and the expenditures. Now remember, anything above 5.3 automatically goes to the enterprise fund. That's only the cap on what could be spent out of it, anything or raised out of it, anything out of in excess of that automatically goes in to fund their operations, which has been the way we've done this ever since it was created.
Okay. And when might you change that sort of, what does it take to say, well, it's not going to be, it's going to be 4.8 or something? The fuel, oil cost.
It's really a function of his discussions with his business manager on where that's historically where it's come in at, and that's where he is comfortable. I'll certainly, I'm meeting with him tomorrow, so I'll certainly can have a discussion with him on whether he thinks it needs to change. But when we were putting this together and going through all of this, that's what he recommended. So,
John?
I noticed something speaking while we're on the subject of the airport revolver. They have a fund balance that it looks like that they go out of their way to make sure that fund balance of $1 million.
it's about 1.1 million roughly.
Yeah,
is that about it?
1.1 million round numbers, and that's such a predictable thing. You wonder.
Well, that fund balance is actually generated because the revenue in the fund stops at 5.3, and then anything else has gone over to their airport operations.
Right.
That fund balance is generated by any possible reductions in fuel costs. So that is never known until the end of the year when the operations are closed out. So that's why there's a money building up in there.
So they don't. That's interesting. They don't take into their P&L then any reduction in.
He's recommended leaving it there in the event that something happens and goes in the opposite direction.
This is a very simple thing. That's why I wonder what can go in an opposite direction.
Well, don't forget once revenue comes in at 5.3, okay, that's what they're authorized to expend as well, okay. But once revenue hits that, it automatically is going over there. So the way that you're covering the additional cost, if fuel were to go in the opposite direction, is that fund balance would start to come. It would start to drain down if fuel costs started to rise, because they're authorized to spend up to 5.3 million.
What he's done is he's taken away any variation you would have in your P&L.
He's trying to cover it, yeah.
He's just trying to negate that.
Yes.
Yeah, I got you.
Okay.
So along the same lines, so budgeting 5.3, he's got margin built into that, obviously. With the absolute decline in the cost of a barrel of oil,
Yep.
hence the cost of Jet A or whatever he's buying,
Sure.
what's that going to do to his revenue projections? And I suspect you've already considered that, at least you have.
We
I
have,
hope
and
it's
when we
obvious.
talked, he again feels comfortable that he's going to be able to hit the 5.3 in that, and then sustain what is over it.
So what would he have to sell in additional fuel gallons this year over last year to make up for the decline in the price of Jet A?
I do not know that off the top of my head, but I will have
So
the
that's a
answer
good
for you
question to
tomorrow.
ask,
No,
because
absolutely.
if you've got an absolute decline in fuel cost of 25%,
Agreed.
then he's got to sell a hell of a lot more fuel than he has been in order
Right.
to get back to his number.
And I will do my best to have that answer for you tomorrow night at the next meeting, because like I said, I am meeting with him tomorrow morning, so.
And we can bring that
Yeah, I mean,
subject
it'll
up,
get,
it'll be part of the.
And it's
report
part of
budget.
his budget
I think we
presentation
should
too.
tie
We
that-
can,
oh,
tie this
absolutely
together.
tie
Yeah,
it together, but as
Right.
I was looking at
Yeah,
this,
yeah,
I
yeah,
was,
yeah.
no, and it's a good question.
Well, it's very good because, supposedly that 1,000,001 is to cover variations, but you potentially have a much larger variation than that.
You could. I mean, the 1.1 really is covering the event of fuel going in the opposite direction, okay, from where it is now. But it also would be able to cover any increased fuel sales that we had, because again, once we have that limit, but the only revenue staying in there is 5.3, and everything gets transferred out. So it's hedging against increased fuel sales that he's going to have to pay for and potential increase in costs. But I will get the number on what additional fuel he has to sell to get above the 5.3 number based on where it is
just to
today.
get to it,
Pardon me?
just to get to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, if I can,
Yeah,
Mr.
yeah.
Chairman, so he's got, he's trying to build in a hedge, obviously.
Yeah.
If you were to come in, or he were to come in and put in the revolver $4 million,
Right.
would he only be able to?
He would only be able to
accumulate
expend,
revenue
he can only expend what's authorized at town meeting.
So it makes sense for him to go
Right.
to the maximum amount.
Right.
Even if he falls short.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's what.
Because he would potentially still have to buy fuel, even if revenue was falling short.
And if he falls short this year, is he limited next year to what it came to this year?
No.
or- Okay.
No, the revolving funds are set based on what town meeting appropriates, or authorizes, so it doesn't look at revenue in the same terms as like local estimated receipts or something in a general fund side, so.
Is it, okay, go
Let me
ahead.
just, did he have any exposure to Island Air on the fuel side?
I believe so, but I don't know the extent. I'd have to ask. I haven't seen the full review yet, which is one of the things we're sitting down tomorrow for.
And this is a question really to anybody who can ask it, but even though the numbers, 5.3, are the same on the revenue and expense, don't they really measure a couple different things? Which is, he can't have more revenue than 5.3. So if it's, otherwise it goes into whatever. And he also can't have more expenses. So in a scenario where he's got increased volume and increased prices, his expenses will go up. And so because I was thinking there should be some kind of I thought the difference of the two should be, a margin.
Well, the difference in the two is actually what's going
But it may
into the
be different.
undesignated fund
You may want
balance.
them to be
Yes.
different.
It's going to vary depending on what
Right,
happens.
that's what I mean, yeah.
But he's building a margin, and you can see it in the prior year.
Right.
Right,
actuals.
right.
You can,
I mean, even
so
though-
you can basically
right.
figure out what the margin
But you
is.
may not want to budget a margin, is what I'm saying, because of the other stuff that's going on. Is that a fair statement? I'm asking, just.
I think he does budget a margin, quite frankly.
Oh, yes, he does.
He has
But
to.
not
He
here.
kind of,
here,
he has to
not
be
here.
able to,
Yeah,
he has
right.
to budget
Yeah.
just
No,
in
no,
case
yeah.
to cover it, yeah.
But this doesn't reflect that.
I mean, that's
Budget, yeah.
a big piece of the bargain.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, he shouldn't be taking in fuel and just reselling it. I mean, that's a lot of effort for no gain.
Right.
Boy, he's not doing that.
No.
That's a big piece of it.
Just to follow on the
yeah.
same subject, so if this, let's say for fiscal 16,
Yep.
there's going to be a nice margin in there. Fuel costs have dropped probably faster than he's lowered his prices, so the $1,000,001 goes to $1,006,000.
Yep.
And then I don't know what happens. So is there, at some point, does that reserve fund get too big, and what can you do with it if it gets, I mean, you
Well,
don't
I mean-
need $5 million sitting in the fuel reserve balance, right? Not that it would get there.
I don't want to say we do or we don't need it, but what could happen is if he needed, it could be available to be transferred from there if we so chose to the airport operation, since it's for that. So if he needed that as a revenue source, he could transfer unused fund balance out of there if he felt that he was in a position to do that. But with the volatility, I think everybody believes oil prices and thus gas prices are going to stay somewhat depressed for a period of time. So, that's a decision for Tom to make. But I think that some of his concern has been that, again, he only has a $5.3 million cap, and if he starts getting close to that, he needs that flexibility with that to be able to, because he's authorized to spend the $5.3 million, regardless of what revenue comes in at. A revolving fund authorization, it doesn't authorize collection of revenue to that. It authorizes expenditures to that level. So having that fund balance, should something happen where we start selling less, or the price of the fuel goes down and he's not making the same margin, then he has authorization to spend the $5.3 million, regardless of whether he took $1 of revenue in. So there's a reason why, that's the rationale for keeping it and not really doing much with it until it's at a point that he's comfortable with.
So is his markup based on dollars or volume?
I'm not in the fuel business, so when he's in,
because it would be different if it's based on volume, he does the same thing. He won't be hurt by declining prices.
Mhm.
But if it's based on dollars and the prices go low, his markup, he'll generate, his base
Yeah, but
gets
he's not
lower.
going to raise his, he'll keep his margins the same.
Oh, he'll raise.
Yeah,
the markup.
I don't believe because the cost is going down, he's going to start raising his prices.
Yeah.
He's going to keep his margins relatively
And
flat,
he's
so
gotta
that.
compete with, remember, he's
No,
gotta
I know, but
compete with
but
the
if he keeps the margins, if he keeps the multiple the
He's
same,
gonna do it.
it's on a lower base.
Absolutely, and that's the
So-
question of,
Right, okay,
what's
Right.
going to happen.
Okay.
Right, absolutely, and that's the question that I'll do my best to get an answer for you tomorrow.
I'm curious about, and this is something I didn't pick up last year, which I'm surprised I didn't, but I didn't. I noticed that in the last couple of years, you have built up this fund balance.
Which one?
I'm talking about the
Fuel revolver?
Fuel revolver.
Okay.
Where did that money come from?
Well, it came from the spread between the 5.3, again, remember, is the expenditure cap, and that's the cutoff where revenue starts being transferred to the enterprise fund. So when we authorize 5.3, that's the top of the revenue that we take into the revolving account, and it came from the simple fact that prices are going down.
No, the fund balance.
The fund balance is simply at June 30th, okay, is the spread between the $5.3 million that we took in revenue minus all of the costs that we've paid out for fuel for that year. That's where it's coming from.
Let me say it another way. Okay, going forward, we're going to keep that fund balance nice and flat. The last couple of years, we had to build it up.
Sure.
In my view, that money came into as a fund balance in lieu of profit. The money had to come from somewhere. If you make a profit on selling fuel, and it goes to your bottom line, unless you put it into something like this.
But this is technically his bottom line at the airport. I mean, it's a fund for, it's his bottom line on the airport, right?
Yeah, he had a $650,000 profit margin in fiscal year 15.
Right.
Which
Right.
goes, you add that to the beginning fund balance,
Then
and then it rolls into the next fiscal
Right.
year.
Instead of
which-
going to retained earnings, it went into here.
It stays here. It doesn't
Yeah,
move
it
from
doesn't
here.
move.
It never moves from here.
It had to come from somewhere. So the point is that instead of retained earnings, it went into here.
Right, because it was generated in here.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So it stays with the fund it was generated in, unless, of course, it wasn't
In the future,
reauthorized.
if we have an excess, it goes into the retained earnings.
No, it'll always stay in here.
It will always stay in.
It always stays with the fund, unless, under the statute, the fund is not reauthorized.
Gee.
But I wouldn't recommend not reauthorizing it, so.
Okay. I won't tie you up any longer on
No,
this.
does that make sense?
what I don't understand is how you
Say yes.
magically maintain exactly the same fund balance going forward.
Well, because he's believes that he's going to bring in 5.3 and expend 5.3, so that's how we're doing it.
Anything else from anyone on any of the revolving funds? Oh, Stephen.
What do you want to say about this? Because mine's on a different issue.
No, mine's on a different issue.
Oh,
Go ahead, Steve.
Well done.
Okay. Small potatoes, I guess, compared to this fuel fund. But what's going on at the Low Beach housing? Over the last 3 years and then projected for next year, total, we're going to spend about $135,000 on maintenance.
do you want to take
That's been a series of things, a new furnace, heating system, cooling system, flooring, bathroom renovation, mold remediation. It's really a fighting battle out there with all that ongoing stuff. It's an old structure, old concrete structure.
Okay. How big is that as compared to the lifeguard housing? And the reason I ask is because the repair budget there is comparatively small.
Well, there's no comparison really. You're looking at two buildings at the Loran Barracks that are, I think there's room for 30 people in one, and that's doubling up in a room. And the other one, I think there's 3 rooms. There's room for 6 people, and then there's some garages attached to it, that kind of thing. Where the lifeguard houses are just old houses. That we have 3. We got one down on Washington Street, one on what's the name of that? It's out by the airport.
Okerwall?
Yeah, Orkawall. And then we're borrowing one on 39 Washington Street, I believe. And so the renovations there, it's probably a little deceiving because we just started this fund here a few years ago. It really hasn't built up. And we did a lot of renovations to the Orkawall house out of the public building fund, I think 2 years ago.
So, Chief, if I could ask, is the Low Beach, is that year-round housing? Is that seasonal?
It's seasonal, but we've got a couple of full-time officers living in there that haven't been able to find housing during the winter right now. So the 2 buildings, one of them doesn't have winter heat, and the other one does, but it's technically seasonal for the biggest part of it.
Anything else on this topic?
Yeah, same topic, actually.
Okay.
Seeing it was seasonal, I'm just looking at the oil bill, and it's like $7,000. It just seems exorbitant.
Well, you've got a single shower facility out there with, when they're all taking showers for 36 people that we have out there, and then plus the heat for the winter. We do leave it going because the water's in the building. The only buildings we actually drain the water is the second dorm, the smaller dorm out there, and the reason we do that is because it doesn't have the winterization as like the other building does. And then the two of the 3 lifeguard houses we totally winterize those.
Any other questions about any of the other revolving funds, Cliff?
I think it's the beach improvement revolver. We're just trying to follow it. I've been around for 6 years now, and I guess these things are in flux. It just shows where we had miscellaneous revenue of like $480,000, and now it's like $116,000. Just wondering.
Well, it actually is, the way it's presented is because it actually goes to 2 different locations. Part of it goes to natural resources and part is used by the police department. If you look on fiscal 17, it has 116.5. That actually would be is relative to the natural resources part. And then the next page behind it immediately shows the beach improvement police portion, which projects $285,000. So it's roughly consistent with what's been done in prior years, but because there's 2 locations doing it last year, we'd actually split it out this way.
Right.
So, okay.
Other questions on the revolving funds?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah. Yeah. Brian, I asked you the questions before about strategy on
Yep.
lowering them or not. And the reason I did is because at the end of 5 years, you're talking about a reduction in total of about $1.2 million.
Yep.
So I was wondering if that was purposeful or not. You know, I've always been uneasy about revolver funds because we've got this hunk of money sitting there. You know what I mean? And in any given year, it can go up or down. But I do notice it seems to be down. Was that just an accident of extending or was that purposeful?
Probably a little bit of both, I suppose. I think I'd have to look. I think quite a bit of it probably is specifically relative to the ambulance reserve, because you're saying over 5 years you have that, so I'd have to look, but I'm pretty sure a lot of it is specifically relative to that. But some of it is relative to fees being charged. You know, we kind of look at what the fees were. We started looking to take more, instead of just using the current most recent fiscal year, we've tried to look at taking an average of them, because I don't necessarily think the immediate past year is an absolute predictor of what's going to happen. So I think some of it is in changing that. I think some of it is, you know, the chief has explained with regard to Low Beach, some of it's just required increased maintenance that we have to do that comes out of there. So I think that there's a natural ebb and flow to these to revolving funds. I certainly don't want any of them to get to zero or even below zero, because if they get to below zero, then we have to make it up somehow. So I think a lot of it is just there is an ebb and flow to some of these on what they have to do, especially when you're talking about maintaining housing facilities or things of that nature coming out of them. Or if you have the ambulance reserve, you're talking about $200,000 and $300,000 expenditures at one time when you're buying ambulances. So there is some of that strategically. To the best of our ability, I would like to keep them somewhat static so we don't have large fluctuations within them, but I don't know that that's inherently...
We got the ambulance every so often.
Yeah, so I think that's... And you know, like I said, with the housing that we're maintaining for seasonal staff, there's going to be fluctuations in the maintenance expenses that we have.
What are other towns across the Commonwealth is this a pretty typical... what we have here in revolver funds, is that pretty typical of a community?
I think it, to be honest with you, kind of is relative to where the community is located. In my prior community, we didn't have anywhere near the revolving funds, but we also didn't have anywhere near the activity going on. So I think for our type of community, I absolutely think it's pretty typical of where they are.
And Brian, did you say there may be a further discussion about the ambulance reserve fund as we get into the conversation about ALS?
Yes,
and
absolutely, yes, because there's some changes that the chief, and I don't want to speak for the chief, I know he's here, and I don't know how much he wants to discuss, but there are potentially some revenue and expenditure changes that are going to be happening,
But
and as those
can
kind
that
of
up
come
when
to
we
light,
do.
we will represent the reserve fund as those come. Like I said, I presented it based on exactly what we know to date, because some of those require other action that hasn't been taken
So we can take that
yet.
up when the chief
Yes.
does his budget?
Yes.
Great. Yes, David?
Brian, an overall question. I notice in some of these revolving funds you include premiums for Blue Cross Blue Shield, and others you don't. Is there a strategy as to why some have them and some don't? And
The way it was
or
supposed to be
a
done, and
reason.
I'd have to double check to make sure it was, but typically if we're funding a salary of a permanent full-time employee that is eligible for health insurance, we would be charging it. If it's seasonal, there wouldn't be any eligibility, so that's where there would be some fluctuation, and I can go back to make sure that that's what was occurring or is occurring. That's the way, as we do it, that it should be being done.
yeah, you just might want to check to make sure
I will.
it's consistent
Yes.
across the...
Peter?
Brian or Bill, this may be a question for you on the waterways. On the marine moorings, the rentals versus the permits, there's a change in the kind of the revenue allocation or the revenue we're getting in. Looks like it's going down in the rentals and going up in the permits themselves. Are we taking some of the rental moorings and allocating them to permanent moorings?
Peter, I didn't quite follow that question.
Yep. If you look at the rental moorings, and let's just look at 2015, we're looking at $75,000 worth of income. In the actual mooring permits, not the rental moorings, you're about $211,000 in revenue. And then we show that going down in 2016, but then we show it going back up in 2017. But what seems to go up and down is both the rentals and the permits, the permanent permits. So is there a change in the number of permanent permits?
No, there's no change. I think what the fluctuation in that was a result of fiscal year payment, when the payments were received at various times. We changed the contract, the mooring contract, got a new contractor taking over the moorings last year, and I think there was some delays, and what would have been paid last fiscal year is paid this fiscal year, or we expected it to be paid,
Okay.
that kind of thing.
Great, thank you.
Anything else? So we'll close the conversation about revolving funds. All right. The next item on our agenda, and I thank Brian for distributing a copy of the citizen articles. And I believe thank you for putting page numbers on them. So we concluded the farm, right to farm, I believe. And the next item is on page 7, the appropriation for Sconset Fire Station. And this to see if the town will vote to approve the sum of $150,000 to repair the fire station, including front entry doors, front steps, rotten trim, and repainting all exterior trim. And I know Mr. Eldridge isn't here.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
I see that we have the citizen sponsor of one of our articles, which we reviewed last time.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to invite her to
Sure.
speak or let her
Yeah.
know that we won't be.
Right. Would you like to take that out of order? Is that what you're suggesting? Or?
It is, yeah.
Okay. Is that all right with everybody?
What are we talking about?
Oh, we'll find out. Would you like to come down and tell us what article you are? Yes. If you're here to speak to? And if it's all right, we'll take it out of order to be mindful of your time.
Hi,
Hi.
my name is Sam Parsons.
Hi.
And I don't even know if I should be here. I just thought that I would stop by.
Okay.
I filed the citizens article to change the zoning on Marble Way.
Okay, Marble Way.
Okay, that's first.
And there are two, one that I think the planning board is proposing and then one that I had filed.
Does anybody know what the Marble Way article number is?
Second article on page 1.
It's on page 1.
Okay. So we did discuss this last time. We had some testimony. I'm just saying these things to kind of refresh my memory. And we had sent these to be deferred and to be discussed by the planning board, isn't that
Yes.
what we? Okay.
Yeah.
But since you're here, if you'd like to speak to it, we'd be happy to hear any comments you have on it.
Sure.
So we haven't gotten a recommendation. Typically, we wait to get a recommendation from the planning board, but this is an opportunity for you to give any kind of input that we would share with the planning board and the planning staff.
Okay, perfect.
Great.
Thank you. I've never done this before.
No, you're doing great, so.
So I live on Marble Way, and there is residential zoning on one side of the street, and then C-Tech zoning on the opposite side of the street. And up until, I think, May of last year, there were only residences on the C-Tech side of the street. One of the lots sold in May of last year got subdivided into 2 lots, and 2 massive 90-foot-long buildings are being proposed for those 2 lots. And because there's nothing like that on the street or even on Bartlett Road that abuts the property, no one in the neighborhood is really happy about it. And when this 90-foot-long building went in front of the HDC, at every single meeting, the HDC kept saying, you guys have got a huge problem on your street. You need to change the zoning to residential. There's a huge problem here. This should have been done a long time ago. And so that's what I did. I was advised by the HDC, by the chairman of the HDC, to change the zoning. So I went and met with Andrew, and he said that that was something that was actually in the works anyway, because there are 2 pockets of RC2 at the end of the CTEC block where there's the commercial zoning, and he said that they were planning to do that anyway, to change it into residential. So the fact that it came from me was fine. So that is really what we're wanting to do.
All right. Any questions from anybody? Cliff?
I didn't watch the whole meeting the other night, the selectmen's meeting, where it was pretty extensive discussion. What was the outcome?
That they wanted to sleep on it
Okay.
and not make a decision. I did appeal. So the reason I was at the Board of Selectmen was because the HDC did end up approving a 90-foot long building, despite at every meeting that they went to, them saying the building was too big. This wasn't fitting within the neighborhood. This is too big, bring it down, and it got approved eventually. So we did appeal it and went in front of the Board of Selectmen on Wednesday night. And they spoke to town council, I guess, read a comment that said that, I guess that was helpful for us, and the board decided to sleep on making a decision until the January 20th meeting.
Was that in the form of an appeal, or what was the?
So the HDC did approve the building,
Right.
the 90-foot long building, which I
Right.
appealed.
Oh, so you appeal, okay, so they were acting on an appeal. That
Yes.
was an appeal.
So I appealed it, and then that was the meeting on Wednesday night. But yeah, and just at the same time, we were encouraged to change the zoning just on our street, just the section that is residential.
Joe?
Just curious.
Do you care if we ask questions?
Oh,
Okay, great.
of
Go
course.
ahead.
And maybe this is not your area of expertise, but how long has the other side of the street been zoned CTEC?
CTEC, I guess 2 or 3 years is what I found out the other night. I guess it used to be RC2, and then it got changed to CTEC because Bartlett Road has got some boat buildings and commercial buildings on the Bartlett Road side. But what we learned, or what we found out at the HDC meeting, was there should never have been, when they changed it from RC2 to CTEC, they should have left that side of Marble Way. They should have changed that to residential, left the backside of that zone as CTEC, because that is commercial. But there were only residences on the street, so really none of us that lived on the street even knew there was commercial zoning across the road. Buyer beware, and you know, young families that bought a house that didn't even know what zoning was. I certainly didn't when I bought my house. And the only time it came to our attention was when this one particular lot sold last year. And these 2 new buildings were proposed. But everything down the street is residential. There are just houses there.
And what is the purpose of the building that the new owner wants to construct?
One of the owners wants to construct a 6 garage bays for a contractor's shop, for contractors' shops, and then the other lot, that owner is planning to build a parking garage to store 30 plus cars or something like that.
Thank you.
Anything else from anybody? Would you like any last comments you'd like to say? Or?
No,
Okay.
I guess I just
Great. Well, thank you for
wanted to
coming. Appreciate it.
familiarize you with why
great.
we wanted to do that.
I
And
think you did a nice job.
thank you.
All right. Thank
All
you.
right.
Thanks.
Can I leave, or do you want me to stay
No,
if there are any
no,
other
we
questions?
won't be taking any action. We won't
Okay.
be voting on this. We may, well, because we're still waiting to hear it, have the planning board weigh in, so we won't be taking a vote today. Peter, did you have a question? No. Okay.
I know there's a public hearing on January 28th with the planning board for
Right.
the zoning.
Right,
I got the notice in the paper.
yeah. Okay, good.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Okay, let's go back to the, anybody else who's here, any other citizen article sponsors here who want to? Okay, let's go to the, well, I'm sorry, you're here anyway, so, all right. Going back to the Sconset Fire Station.
What page was that again?
That's on page 7. Craig?
Don't I recall the fire chief basically withdrawing this article, saying that it wasn't going to be funded at this time, there was going to be something else in the...
Well, this is a citizen article. It was sponsored by Mr. Nelson Eldridge. So, Chief, if you'd like to enlighten us, and yeah, do you know which one we're talking about?
I do, yes, yeah.
Okay.
It's a citizen article.
Yeah.
It didn't come from us. I wasn't aware it was going to happen until we saw it on the list. No one came to us first. It wasn't requested of us. We're putting a committee together to study sconce at the station, what kind of presence we want and where it's going to be and where we're going to fit. We do want to put some type of seasonal 24-hour presence, firefighting presence in Sconset. We're not sure if it's going to be at that station, if it's going to be somewhere else. It's a historic building. I'm not sure what we can and can't do to it yet. So we're against the motion. We do have $30,000 in CPC funds left that we can use to fix the front doors and keep the building updated as much as we can between now and we will be back next year with a plan as to either refitting this building or somewhere else. I'm not sure what that plan is going to be yet.
Are you willing to give assurances you'd use the $30,000 to make sure that we don't have constructive demolition through neglect on this building?
Absolutely, yeah. The building it's watertight now. It's got a good roof. The real problems right now, I think, are the front doors. It's got a couple small rot spots in them, so we can fix those so that we keep it watertight, so there won't be the building won't fall apart any further between now and next year.
I mean, I think that's a concern of many people because it is an historic building.
It's a beautiful historic building, and if it doesn't meet our needs for a fire station, then it'll absolutely be a museum or something else. It's an incredible building, and we don't want it falling down or falling into any more disrepair than it already has.
As you develop the composition of committee, are you going to have representatives from Sconset serving on that? Or is that
We've asked Schnooky to be on the committee.
Okay.
Linda Williams,
Okay.
I believe, said she'd be on the committee.
Okay.
Further than that, we haven't
Okay.
gone any further or had any
I
meetings
just know
yet.
that the Eldridge family and Mr. Eldridge have, they're long-standing.
Absolutely. We
Thought,
definitely want him on the committee to figure out
great. That's
what makes sense for Sconset.
Thank you very much. Anything else?
Well,
Yeah.
I'm assuming everybody remembers that this was, that CPC had an application and there was no detail, and so they turned it down simply because it had no detail on it.
Okay. So discussion, thank you, Chief. Discussion, we can make a motion on this. I would suggest that whatever action we take, we could put in a comment that the chief is establishing a committee to identify the location of fire services in Sconset, and we're coming back with a recommendation next budget year, I assume, that some repairs can be made from existing funds. I don't want to start with a comment, but I guess I am. So, given that, any thoughts on action we might take on this article?
Well,
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
motion not to adopt and include a comment?
Is there a second?
yes.
Is there any discussion?
I'm comfortable with it as long as we have assurances that they'll put some money into the building from existing funds. I mean, that to me is sort of the crux of the issue here. I mean, it doesn't have to be $150,000, but whatever, the $30,000 or
Sure.
some amount of money, so we're not faced with a $300,000 bill next year to repair the neglect.
So we could put that in a comment, that we've been assured by the fire chief, or if you like, would that?
Yeah, and I think that it also goes to Nelson's concern about, and others, about having money put towards the building.
Right, okay.
It might be a good idea to have the fire chief give us a little note on what they plan to do, a little more detail, so that
Okay.
we could put that in there as well.
Okay. Does that sound like a good idea? Cliff?
Do we know why they didn't try to get some sort of funding through the CPC again?
They did, they
They did.
applied for it,
Oh, they did.
but they didn't have the requisite
Detail.
I thought that was
detail.
from last year.
No, no.
Because I know this
They-
is more than
yeah.
once we've seen this.
Yeah,
they-
this year too,
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
no detail.
all right.
So, Chief, would it be possible for you to send me a little email that could define how you're going to spend the money and what the top priorities might be in the budget and the dollars you have now?
Absolutely. I'll get you, in the next 2 weeks, does that work?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
I'll get a list of where we intend to spend the money to
Great.
make sure that nothing falls
Okay,
in further
good.
disrepair. We're just worried that if we spend $150,000 and next year we decide that that's not the correct place for a placement for our services, that we wasted money. We
Right.
don't want to waste money. We want to
Yeah.
make sure it's spent
Makes sense.
appropriately.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
So, any further discussion on the motion? And it was motion not to adopt? Okay, all those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, no? All right, unanimous. The next item are the two CPC articles. The first one is the budget transfer. And so this is where they transfer money from various articles at town meetings transfer into the CPC fund balances that are unspent in the remainder of a project approved in prior fiscal year so that it's available for future appropriations. Is there a motion? I would like to make a motion on this.
What if I should recuse? I'm involved with two of the groups
Okay,
here.
all right, okay.
Then I'll make a motion to adopt.
All right, is there a second? Any discussion?
What's the, on Article 24 and 28, the Dreamland Foundation, is the money going into, back to the
CPC.
back to the CPC?
All these,
Unspent.
yeah, all these monies on the left go
Right.
to
First
the
one.
CPC.
Okay.
Even if it's 99 cents. Okay, all those in favor, aye? Opposed, no? Okay, moving on, the next is the appropriation article for this fiscal year. The CPC, Mr. Bogrand and others made a nice presentation. We had a lot of all of our questions answered at that time. Are there any further comments or questions before we take an action on this?
Mr. Chairman, just a comment.
Yeah.
Like Craig, I'm on the board of Habitat, so I don't know whether I
Okay.
can recuse myself as to that particular item or just put that as a comment in the minutes. So.
Okay,
And I'm on the board of the NHA,
all right.
so I have the same issue.
I'm chairman of the finance board of the First Congregational Church, so I got to.
Okay, so we have, and Craig, are you recusing yourself? No.
I'm with Habitat and with the South Church Preservation Fund also.
So 1, 2, 3, 4.
Four.
So 1, 2, 3. So we don't have a quorum then, do we?
Yeah.
No, we do, including
Okay.
you, we still have 5.
Okay, all right.
Real quick, are you all recusing?
Not all. No.
Okay,
The,
just disclosing, who's recusing?
Is there any way to vote?
4.
Separate out the ones so that we, I mean, I'd like to be on record as supporting it.
Okay,
but-
all
Well,
right.
me too, and I'm not even sure.
I think as long as you disclose it, then everybody's all right.
Okay, if you,
So
I'm
we're gonna-
disclosing I'm on the board of the Nantucket Historical Association.
Okay, so, with NHA.
I'm disclosing that I'm on the chairman of the finance board at First Congregational Church.
Joe?
That's congregational church, right?
Yep.
And I'm disclosing I'm an officer and on the board of Habitat for Humanity Nantucket.
Greg?
I'm on the board of the South Church Preservation Fund.
Are you going to recuse or disclose?
I'll disclose.
Okay, that's South Church Preservation Fund,
Correct.
and that's it?
That's it.
Okay.
All right.
Now I'll make a motion to adopt.
Thank you, Stephen. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Okay. So the next article, the citizen article, Mark Dawson, we are, as you know, this would be subject to the action of the Board of Sewer Commissioners. We're waiting for a recommendation from them on anything related to sewer district map changes, so we'll defer this one. And the next one.
I'm going to recuse myself of this one. Is that what this one is?
Oh, is this yours?
Oh, yeah, I'm
Page-
sorry.
Page 11?
Okay.
Right,
Then,
Bob?
the next article is cost reimbursement. To see what sums, I'll let you read it. And, you know, I'll ask Brian, because I did speak to Cliff about this, I always thought we had to have a source of funding for these, and is that, but Cliff assures me that's the language that is in other articles so I don't know if that's, and do you know what if I could ask the sponsor a question? Or do we know what I should ask this group, what town council, does anybody have the town council?
I can tell you what it said. He weighed in on it a while ago.
His opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, David, but his opinion was that this didn't qualify as a public use, or it wasn't for the public good, so it wasn't an appropriate use of
okay.
town funds.
Okay.
Just the final paragraph, if you'd like me to read what town council had to say. Since the denial of this permit application, we have not heard from Mr. Williams' attorney. We are not aware of any lawsuit against the town in this matter, and no settlement has been agreed to. In my opinion, Mr. Williams' requested appropriation of $150,000 would not be a legal appropriation because there is no public purpose for the expenditure of town funds, absent a court judgment or acknowledgement of liability by the town in the form of a settlement and release executed by the Board of Selectmen and Mr. Williams. As you know, pursuant to GL 40, Section 5, a town may only appropriate money for a valid public purpose. Absent some acknowledgement of liability by the town, therefore, a payment to Mr. Williams of monies appropriated by town money would not be appropriate or lawful. And that's the final paragraph of John's
Okay.
four-paragraph answer.
All right. Thank you. I think one of the roles the Finance Committee has, at least from my perspective, is, really an advocate for citizens. It's not that we're the court of last resort, but I think there are some allegations or concerns brought by the citizen petitioner. And while we may not, while we may need to move not to not adopt this article, I'm wondering if there is any interest or conversation about facilitating or seeking information, although it's a private matter, of some of the basis for this. I just open that up for Matt.
I do, personally. I've been following this for a couple of years. Right? Yeah. And it's more than a private issue. There's other individuals involved that have been affected. So I think that if this committee could help facilitate getting at the truth and showing some transparency, whether it be with a subcommittee or whatever, I think that would behoove this committee to go forward with that.
Okay.
Tomorrow, if I can add, I see that Tomorrow Plus is coming. I think this would be a question to ask Mr. Morris at that time also, and hopefully show some illumination on the subject for us.
All right.
But getting back to it, I think we should look at it.
Okay.
Can we hold till tomorrow then? I mean, I'd like to hear from
Yeah. We could take, I don't know, would it be a benefit to take action today, given the attorneys or not? Because I think it's, we always carefully listen to what town council says, or we can wait. I just don't know if it's better to wait or not, so I can defer whatever you all say. Stephen?
I think our hands are more or less tied with respect to this article, but I agree with Matt and with your suggestion that maybe we consider, and consider tomorrow, maybe with Andrew and some other voices from Plus here, consider whether it might be worthwhile for this committee to strongly suggest that somebody else look into these issues before they do turn into lawsuits, which may be more expensive for the town in the long run. I mean, if these are issues which can still be rectified, or if there's something systemically wrong, it'd be better if we could address it now before these things end up in litigation, where the damages can be much worse than the cost.
So why don't we just defer it? Is that okay with everybody?
I think that we might have to, we would certainly do it tomorrow,
Yeah,
but I
right.
think we're going to have to
Yeah.
make a motion not to adopt
Right.
this one, but we can still
Okay.
have that conversation.
And I guess, having not, I think it may be better if we do defer it, because it maybe brings some more weight to it, but, so it's good. Those are all great suggestions, and somebody kicked me in the shins to remind me of that tomorrow. I'd appreciate it. So, Clifford, are you okay with that?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Okay. Okay.
Well, it's been an ongoing problem for 3 years.
Yeah.
My position with this article is, I regret that it's the same issue I had with the airport. It could have been resolved
Right.
much quicker,
Yep.
efficiently.
Okay.
Great points that Steve's made.
Yeah.
We're dealing with a piece of property, we're dealing with a house. I don't know why these matters can't be resolved efficiently. It's been 3 years. It's just out of control.
Is there any information you want to share with the committee before the meeting tomorrow?
You know what I could do? I could print up the scenario of how it started, which we had. It was given to the selectmen years ago.
Okay.
On this last professional document last spring. Just how this whole thing started, and where it went, and how it was
Okay.
connected.
It'd be helpful to know if there's been any action since then. I mean, not any communication, or since a year ago, you said, or?
Oh, no, this has been ongoing.
Okay.
Attorneys.
Okay, all right.
It's-
So just kind of a summary of, as of today kind of thing, so.
It's a-
All right, okay.
So is the town, I'm sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
Tim, but I mean, so is the town sort of at the stage, so sue us, Cliff? I mean, is that sort of their position?
I don't know, you have to ask them.
So we'll do that tomorrow?
Straight answer out of
Well, we have a letter here from Giorgio.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Basically, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, we have a letter from Giorgio saying, when you say, does the town have a position, according to his letter, it says that they have no liability.
Right, but I think we could still pose questions about the process and.
Understand that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying,
No,
the
right.
town does have a position, and that is that they don't have any liability.
Right, yes, that's correct.
So they obviously have the other side of the story, their side, the side of the story is one set of information, and yours is another.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't know, I think it's all the same information. Unfortunately, lawyers have to get involved, and it's pretty straightforward. Not to elaborate on it, but, I moved the house, we moved houses here in Nantucket, we moved anywhere in the world. And I think mine's the only one that's been, in a sense, denied as far as the building permit. And I can't get a straight answer over 3 years. Or I misdirected, or, personal tax, but lied to. I just went to the Board of Appeals in Boston, and again, there was misinformation, showed the facts, and then meeting that board, which works really hard with some difficult issues. It's almost embarrassing to have to go up there and deal with these individuals. Not the board, but the building inspector, in my opinion. The chairman came and almost apologized to me and asked me, we're trying to something, we're trying to help them move forward, but after 3 years, it's just a little too late. And when I expose them for not telling the truth or misleading, nobody seems to want to do anything. Everyone seems to just move on our direction. And I think this has to be some accountability, because they are liable, the town is liable, the decisions he makes, and the things he does, and someone should stand up. And at some point, if you're wrong, or you're misleading, or you're lying.
But this is kind of a person, I mean.
I know, but that's the facts. It's just the facts, you gotta listen to it. We
Okay,
went through it at the airport.
we're just having.
Same thing at the airport.
So-
And I almost lost my job, and that guy finally got fired, and that's the fact. And everybody covered it up and said it didn't happen, there was no wrongdoing, and there was. And there's wrongdoing there. It's cost me a lot of money.
So these are all, this is your testimony, and those aren't, so we'll certainly appreciate that. Is there anybody else who would like to comment on this article? Or from the town, or anybody else? No? Okay. Thank you. The next article is a zoning article. So we're deferring this. We're deferring all the zoning articles, correct? This one, Clifton, real estate. And I'd asked, Brian's going to check into what the status of the real estate committee. Is anybody here on that committee? No? Okay. So we've deferred some things.
There's nobody from FinCom on the real estate acquisition committee? Yeah, that's an interesting.
I think you're not asking the right question. Has the committee even been formed?
Well, I know that it's been formed. I
It
know
has,
some people
okay.
that are on it, but it's interesting that we weren't tabbed for one seat.
I don't even know what the charge of the real estate committee is. So maybe, Brian, do you have any information about that?
Excuse me. I think the charge was to review the parcels that the town has been authorized to sell as they get ready to dispose of them, to ensure that the price is, the bid price is, that we're going, or setting as the minimum price is acceptable or adequate, I guess may be the best word. Outside of that, I'm not 100% sure, but I have, I will be later on today just actually sending an email out to ask about the status of their review of all the articles in the warrant that do have the potential to be disposed of or requested for disposal, authorization to dispose of.
So that's a little different than some of these articles. Some of these are, so it sounds like that has a specific purposes.
Well, it'd be any disposals of land. These would be, if some of these pass, it would authorize the town to sell them, so.
Right. But are they only looking at things that have been authorized at previous town meetings? Or is it?
I think it's any authorization for.
Right, but that's already been passed.
No, it's perspective, too.
Right. It's for any, I believe it's prospective as well.
Is it for acquisition and disposal?
I was under the impression it was for disposal, but
Yeah.
it very well could be for both, to be honest. I'm not entirely sure of what the ultimate charge was. I know that there was a discussion about the disposition of land.
Okay.
So,
who's in whose wheelhouse is that in town management, town administration?
in terms of who's on the committee,
Who do we ask questions about?
well, I know I was given the name of.
Who's the chairman?
I'm not sure who the chairman is, but
Okay.
I'm sending it to, I know that Rhoda Weinman is on the committee, so I'm going to send her the email. That's who they suggested I contact to find out where it's at, so.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I
Yeah.
think you can ask Mr. Vorse tomorrow. Mr. Vorse will be able to
Okay.
answer some
Yeah.
of those questions.
Okay. All right. Now, I mean, the next article is about the acquisition. This is a citizen article. And, I mean, even though, I mean, I'm a little confused about our relegation of these to the real estate committee. So if it is a focus on disposition, real estate acquisition is something that's within our jurisdiction, and the town meeting relies on us to make recommendations on that. So do you want to discuss this, or do we still want to, was it the right thing to refer this issue to
What
that
page are you
committee? Page 13?
The bottom.
13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13. 13.
I think so. I mean, I think the purpose of the committee was to avoid the town acquiring and then disposing of through yard sales property for which it didn't necessarily know the secondary impact of that decision. I mean, I think it sprung from some very specific situations where the town was unaware of exactly how it was going to be disposed of.
But this is a citizen who's asking the town to,
As are most of the others in here, right?
okay.
Doesn't,
So I guess that really, I mean, maybe, I think we should have maybe been more engaged in this, because I'm not sure this is something we want to delegate to, because we don't want to be in a position of, as we've had with some other roles of the Finance Committee, goes to a committee, and then the committee does a lot of work, and they come back here, and we, don't feel, we don't want to antagonize the committee, and I'm not sure those issues get the kind of robust conversation then. That's just my personal opinion. I'll ask others to weigh in on that, comment on that.
So, Craig found the page on the town website for this real estate assessment committee.
Okay.
And it's only charged with reviewing real estate matters which are referred to it by the Board of Selectmen. So
Okay.
unless the Board of Selectmen takes this article and refers it to this committee,
Okay.
they won't study it, they won't come back with any opinion on it. So if we're waiting for some recommendation, it
But I believe
may not
we
be.
sent some things to this committee, didn't we?
I think
all
that
the
we thought
pressure-
we did. I don't know that we have the power to do it based on.
Right,
what
no, I
this
agree,
says,
yeah.
but-
Okay, I'm just trying to
No,
understand the process.
me too. I'm thinking, are we going to get anything back? I don't know.
Right.
Maybe that chairman doesn't.
I just know that this article is something that we've discussed over the last couple of years, and we've taken action, and in this year, we referred it to this committee. And I'm wondering if we should continue to let them deliberate over it, or we should take it back, or get more information about it.
I think Matt's probably right. We can wait till tomorrow and get an answer from Andrew.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to understand, what is the, I mean, if it is within the jurisdiction of this committee, how will his answer inform our decision to,
He can probably direct us at the least to who the chairperson is, and we can get in contact with him directly and find out if we're going to get a response in a timely manner for us to do our own deliberation. Or he'll tell us that these don't fall under their purview and we should do our own deliberation right away.
which is what we've done every year in the
Right.
past. So. And I guess my point is, I don't think, was this committee consulted when this real estate committee was established?
We weren't even invited after the fact, it sounds like.
And so that concerns me too, a little bit. Matt?
If I make a suggestion, just from going on past years, there's a few of these real estate articles that are citizen, so
Yeah.
I would suggest treating them all the same. And I don't have the schedule for our meetings in front of me, but I believe Mr. Force will be coming back talking about zoning and real estate.
Right.
I would suggest, between now and that time that he comes back, is to delineate what the committee, this real estate committee proposed to us, for lack of a better term. It doesn't sound like anything. And assuming not, get the information from Mr. Force, just as we had in the past years, and at that time, deliberate on that. You know, like, for example, this one right here, I'm sure this is all regard to the funeral, proposed funeral home. And it pretty much comes down to that,
But did Andrew weigh in on this in previous years, or was it just our conversation? That's my
I believe,
recollection.
if I had a warrant in front of me, I could tell you, I believe that we did approve something last year, and I can't remember exactly what, because it was at the last minute, and that's why I remember it.
Yeah, but I don't think it involved real estate, though, did it, Matt? I mean,
No, but
I think we sort of approved the two motions that
Right.
Mrs. Stover had for,
It's the
site- wasn't it it was zoning in the various locations, the area at the airport, I think.
It wasn't zoning, I don't have the warrant.
Yeah.
I don't want to speak out of
Okay.
what I know, I'd have to see the warrant.
Okay.
But-
Sounds like
But
a
getting
right.
back to, for this year, for our,
Yeah.
to save spinning the wheels, I think that,
Something like that in those two spots.
this new committee has made add another layer for our deliberations, so let's find out exactly if they have any intention to reporting to us as a committee. And assuming not, and then I would suggest handling it as in past years, where the planning director came in and would talk about these articles, and then go from there. I think we'd be better informed.
I'll just say one more time, I'm not sure we want to have another committee between us and the planning director.
We may not.
Yeah.
That's true.
So that's kind of,
That's
But I think it's too early to tell, and let's get some more
Yeah.
information
Okay,
before we make that.
so we will ask Andrew that when he comes on Thursday. We'll ask him about the process, if that's all right with everybody?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I think though the challenge was, and it goes back actually to the citizens articles coming in through John Brescher on
Right.
behalf, is that, you know, we get brought before us a bunch of articles that are quote yard sale articles, where we see little maps where you're gonna take, you know, 3,000 square feet and, you know, it's gonna go off to basically a butter, because that's quote the only person that would be interested. And my understanding, at least in two of them, that sufficient due diligence wasn't done, and in one case in Sconset, that little decision that, you know, purchase at $2,500 or whatever they purchased, enabled the abutter to subdivide the property, of which is now on the market for 2 lots for $1.2 million each. So, you know,
So it does need more.
and I thought that
Yeah.
was the impetus behind
Okay.
that real estate committee being put together, because they would then look at these in a much more detailed fashion than.
Okay, that makes sense too. So, all right. So we'll have this discussion again on Thursday.
Chairman, I'm going to excuse myself.
Okay. I wish your bride a happy birthday. Dog licenses. This is, citizen is proposing that no license fee shall be charged for a dog owned by a person 70 years or older who licenses their dog by April 30th.
Should there be a year added to the end of that?
I'm sorry?
Or if you license your dog at any point in any year before April 30, you would not have to pay a fee, which is okay with me.
Yeah, based on the 70 years old.
Based on what?
The owner of the dog has to be at least 70.
Oh, okay. Owned by a person aged 70 years or older.
I mean, is that really the intent, that every year we have a tax or fee-free registration before May 1st?
That's what, when she spoke to it before, and also I think she did an
Yeah,
analysis
for
that
people
only
older than
affects.
70, yeah.
Oh,
I
these
have-
licenses are every year? I don't own a dog, so.
I got last year of one.
Okay.
Yep.
And who's in charge of dog licenses?
Town
Oh, town clerk. Oh, okay. So there's no, if there's an administrative burden, it would fall to that office. Right?
Less transactions, no burden.
Well, that's true too. Yeah. I think it was a handful, like less than 10.
20.
20. Okay.
Yeah, something like that. Not a big deal.
So,
Don't know.
who would like to vote against older people and dogs? Is there a motion on the for this?
Move to adopt.
Motion to adopt. Yep.
Second.
Is there a second? A discussion? All those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Okay.
Aye.
To
I
see if
abstain.
you abstain. Okay. One abstention. To see if the town will vote to
Because you're
amend.
old, John? Is that
Oh,
Give a dog?
No license fee should be charged for a dog owned by a person or who licenses their dog. So this would be a bylaw amendment? I'm not sure what the,
That's correct.
okay,
We're fixing it in 2 places, apparently.
okay.
Yep.
So,
You have to accept the statute, so the first article would accept the Mass General Law,
right,
and then you have to fix it in the.
Oh, in the
Appears
bylaws.
in the bylaw
Okay.
by inserting that provision.
Okay. Is there a motion to accept?
Motion to adopt.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
abstain.
Another abstention?
sort of an after-the-fact question? Chief Pittman, is your operation the ones that have to enforce this?
As long as the dog is registered, I don't care if they pay or not.
Okay.
Okay, Management of coastal properties owned by the town. This is leasing, licensing, or any town-owned coastal land for private erosion protection shall be subject to the approval by vote at annual town meeting. Comments on this one?
Which one are you on?
This is the strikeout, what we've already done.
This is on page 14.
Yeah, bottom of the page, yeah.
Yep. No, this would be the additional language. Because right now, I don't know what the process is, but it doesn't require, I don't believe it requires a vote at town meeting. Does it?
Oh, yeah, I thought we voted, I thought we voted that 2 years ago, right?
Okay.
The road-
I think I might need a primer on what all Chapter 67 is if we're going to strike the whole thing.
Yeah,
Strike
that's right.
Chapter 67.
I don't, it says it strike the whole thing.
Okay, all right. It says to strike 67 in entire. So we want to, who do we ask about this?
Probably Andrew again.
Okay. Is that all right with everybody? Okay.
And I would just say also, Mr. Chairman, on this, at least for me, fits into this category of potentially far-reaching changes that we
Right.
know virtually
Nothing
nothing
about.
about.
Yep.
Well,
And the proponent, I don't think particularly enlightened us
No.
as to what it involves, so I just am personally very wary that we end up, and the community listens to what we have to say, so it's with great weight that I think that we should consider this stuff.
well, should we even consider making a change at all? Because, I mean, we spent a lot of time over the last several years doing the, adding the article to Chapter 67, I believe. And my recollection is this was, I thought Chapter 67 was proposed by the citizen at that several years ago. Does anybody remember that? Okay.
2008.
2008? Okay. So now, the same, in which passed at town meeting, Article 67, and now the same individual is coming and asking to have it deleted. So just my own view on that is,
No.
I would.
Catherine has always come in one way or another. She does not want the selectmen to have the ability to do that without town meeting. It really boils down to that. She's been very consistent about that. She doesn't trust them.
So, if you're comfortable with leaving things the way they are, we could take action on this today. If you want to investigate it some more,
I'll
we
make a
can do
motion.
that.
Make a motion not to adopt.
All right, is there a second?
Yep.
Any discussion? All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, no. All right, not to adopt.
Next.
I abstained from that. I feel like we still needed some more information.
Okay,
No, I'm going to abstain also. I would prefer more information.
okay.
Well,
All right.
it's not,
Um,
that was very complicated.
So, you might want to, you can read Article 67, or whatever that, Chapter 67.
Yeah, I found it here.
And that might be, that might give you some more information. You could pose questions subsequent to that. This is a bylaw amendment on page 15, bylaw amendment on nuisance animals, proposed revision of Chapter 55 of the Town Code. Do you all remember the presentation from Ms. Gale? Any questions? The chief is here. I've spoken to him earlier. I don't know if he wants to speak. He might be able to answer questions if you have.
Well, just what his opinion is,
Yeah.
whether he endorses
Chief, do you
this.
want to speak to us?
I'd like to say I have no opinion on this one, but the way this article came about was kind of confusing. It was through a misdirection accidentally by the Board of Selectmen, and went to a group of citizens, of which one of my officers was one of them, to come up with this idea. So until it showed up in a warrant, I had no idea what was being proposed. But in general, It proposes fixes to problems that she has as the animal control officer, and I think they're reasonable fixes. They're not expensive. There are reasonable penalties to go for, leaving an animal in a endangered position, something like that. So in general, I'm in favor of it. I can't think anything in it that I don't think we can live with.
Okay. Any questions of the chief? Anyone would like to make a motion?
Adopt?
Motion to adopt. Is there a second?
Yeah.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
No? Thank you. So the next one are the John Brusher articles, which we will, this is,
By the way, when are we going to, Mr. Chairman, when are we going to hear the planning board's reflection on these?
so I have a call into Andrew, and I was hoping to get some answer to that, but I don't have that. I'll have that for our next meeting.
The first planning board, Mr. Fair, if I could, the first planning board hearing is January 28th. You probably won't get a full answer for another month.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
to answer the question, on the schedule that was passed out, review of real estate and zoning articles is scheduled for Tuesday, February 9th, and Thursday, February 11th.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's going to be.
So we don't, shall we defer this one? Okay. So I think the next two or three or several, I think really kind of fall into that purview that David was talking about. So I think it's, as we talk about, as we learn from Andrew Thursday about the real estate acquisition and the real estate committee, we can speak to that. I remember Arthur making this presentation. But, sorry. Okay, can we do that? Okay. Next is the zoning map change. Is the next one? Is the next one? Is the next one? Is the next one?
That's it.
That's it. Anything, any other comments from members of the committee? Our next meeting is tomorrow. And it is so on the agenda tomorrow is the review of the plus budget, the Wanacomit and Wisconsin Water Enterprise Funds, continue work on the citizen warrant articles, but I'm not sure we'll really need to do that. And this is just as a reminder, the meeting time tomorrow is 4:30, and the meeting place is the Nantucket High School cafeteria. Is there anything else? Motion to adjourn? So moved. All those in favor, aye. Opposed, no. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening. Thank you for your attention today.